Hello, my name is Avery Hackstead. I am the Dungeon Master for Anvil of the South on Mindflayer Inc. I'm an actor, I'm a writer, and I am an enthusiast for character creation. This is the first episode of a character creation episodic series that I'm going to be doing, talking about how to create a character that has depth, that is juicy, that is delicious, so to speak. I'm going to be touching on foundations and anchors. Now, what are foundations and anchors? So let's just dive right in. So foundations and anchors are connections into the world, driving forces, things that root them in place, whether that be our world or a fantasy world, it doesn't matter. We as real people have all of these things that I'm about to talk about in real life. But a lot of people forget about them. They don't think about all of the things that make people nuanced as people. And so we're going to dive into that. The first thing that I want to talk about is the most important. Now think about everything that I'm going to say as a theoretical food pyramid of ideas. So the first thing is the most important, the absolute building blocks of the building blocks, so to speak, and then the second one and all of that. And they all work together. Without any of the layers, it doesn't work, and it doesn't create a pyramid, and the structure just does not exist. So they all intertwine, and with all of these, you'll have the foundations of a great character, right? So the first thing I want to talk about, the base of the pyramid is relationships. Relationships in the world. Now this can pertain to objects, places, people, what have you. Your relationships in real life dictate how you interact with almost everybody. If you have a relationship with a certain place, you're going to act differently when you're in that place, whether that be negative or positive. You have a relationship with a certain type of person, a certain person in general, you're going to have a different interaction with that type of person with that person, right? If they're in D&D, right? If you had a very bad interaction with a necromancer, who would have thought? You will have a certain opinion of necromancers based on that relationship. And a relationship doesn't mean like an elongated thing. A relationship can be 2 seconds, right? What was your relationship with that person? Well, I barely met him, right? That's still a relationship. And remember that. Again, any interaction with people is an interaction. So when you're creating a character, you need to think about, what was your relationship with your parents? Did you have any parents? Friends? Family? How'd you like the place that you lived? Did you have any favorite toys? Favorite book? Favorite hero? Favorite person? Girlfriend? Boyfriend? Partner? What have you? All these things, and you don't need all of them. You just need a couple, right? You don't remember every relationship that you had in real life, and neither will your character. But you do most likely remember some relationships. And the ones that you do throughout your entire lifetime, those have impacted you greatly in who you are today. This translates very heavily into character creation. Your character has relationships. And if they're a sole survivor of an island crash or they were raised by wolves, well, I don't have any relationships. That's untrue. You had a relationship with the wolves. And if you didn't have any living thing around you, then you had a relationship to the place. You had a relationship to coconuts. You had a relationship to sand. You had a relationship to water. Those are relationships. Think about how your character is attached to certain things. This is of the utmost importance. Because that really, when you say you're asked a question, what about your parents? What if, in terms of D&D, right, in terms of role-playing games, if someone asks you as a player or as a writer, oh, and what about your parents? Well, DM, who are my parents? It's going to take you and the player out of it entirely. So, for instance, Cade Morrison, who plays Dagamaris, he was feeling a little bit transient. And so I told him, make relationships. What have you been doing during this specific amount of time? Who have you been with? And he said, okay, well, how do I know if those people exist? It doesn't matter, because that is his character. And if you're writing a character or whatever, that is your character. So you create any of the relationships, and then in the case of Dungeons and Dragons, it is the Dungeon Master's job to make those relationships fit into the world. Because as a writer for a character, you need to make sure that they have those things that make them actual people, right? A lot of the time, you feel like your character's just been bloop, bloop, and he's just there all of a sudden. There's no past, right? There's no time is a line sort of thing. It's time is a dot for a lot of characters, and the dot just like moves around because you have nothing over here anchoring you to anything, so the line cannot be drawn, right? If that makes sense. And relationships are a key anchor. They make you feel alive as that character. And as a reader or a watcher who's watching a character who doesn't seem to have any relationships that most people would, it hinders their ability to project onto them, because it immediately removes a layer of depth from them, and it makes them seem more like a character rather than a person. Again, you don't want to seem like a character as much as you want to seem like a person. They're still characters, but a good character can be empathized with. You can see where they're coming from. You know what they're about, right? You're interested to see where they're going. A character is sort of like Tom and Jerry, right? They're fun to watch, but you don't really care where they came from or anything, because it's just sort of cartoon characters, and that's totally fine. But we're talking about more three-dimensional, rich storytelling characters, and so relationships are of the utmost importance. Let's talk about the second layer of the pyramid, goals to achieve. The second most important, in my opinion, aspect of character creation. And I'm talking about goals of the past, present, and future, as they all intertwine with one another. Your past goals definitely influence your present ones, whether or not they failed, succeeded, changed, what have you, and why they changed, succeeded, or failed influence your present goals. And as your past goals influenced your present goals influence your future goals, whether or not they fail, succeed, or change. And you may be aware of all that, but they influence the future as well. And this will influence how you interact with the world based on your goals. What is your goal with talking to this person, right? Is this goal, or is this talking to this person, is this interaction part of the greater goal? If they are, how do you want to achieve said goal? And this will completely shape and mold that interaction. This is important with all forms of character creation, whether that be RP, storytelling, writing, screenwriting, whatever. It is extremely important that you think of what the character's goal is, and you really nail that down so that they know how to act with other people. Again, when you are at a business meeting, your goal is very different than your goals with friends, your goals with a date, right? And this influences how you act with each of those people that you are interacting with. If you have a character that doesn't have goals to achieve, why are we following them? And don't get it twisted with having superfluous or very two-dimensional goals. Goals can be deeper, and a lot of the time people make goals that are, say, I want to be famous, I want to have a lot of money, I want to have power, right? And those are all fine, right? If they're added onto something else that makes them a bit more nuanced, because we've seen that story before. We've all seen the power hunger guy. We've all seen the, man or woman who hungers for power and wealth. We've seen it. It's done. It's been done. Really, there's only so much nuance you can do without it just being Jeff Bezos, Lex Luthor, one and the same. And that's not a good character, because very few people just have one singular goal in mind, right? If you want money, why do you want money? That's part of the goal, right? That's part of the foundation. That's part of the anchor. What is driving you to get money? Well, because I want to be like Jeff Bezos. Fucking boring, dude, right? It's just boring. And have you ever met anyone who is just like, oh yeah, what do you want to do with your life? And then they say, oh, I just want to be like a millionaire. Okay. Why? I like money. All right, nice talking to you. Later. What do you do with that? You know what I mean? So, yeah, goals, think about them. And think about why they drive your character. There's always a why behind it, right? Why does your character have those goals? And thinking of your previous goals may help with that. And it helps create a holistic character that you can see. Again, people's goals shift and change over time. And you want to think about, if you achieve this goal, what are your goals after that, right? Because then again, most people who have, goals have goals for after their most present goals are completed. These goals can change. These don't need to be steadfast. And, well, you should be steadfast, right? With your overarching goal as it pertains to a lot of RP. They can change, and they should change, but they can only change if you are aware of what those goals are. If you're not aware, then you are transient, and you have no idea why you're doing what you're doing. And a lot of people feel that in real life. I know a lot of people, including myself to a certain extent, who are like, what am I doing? What's going on? No clear goal in mind? I don't know how to act. Get goals on your mind. Let's talk about the third layer of the pyramid. Reasons for leaving, grounded backstory. Now this coincides directly with the second layer, goals to achieve. And they sort of overlap like tectonic plates, causing earthquakes around your character, sending shivers up the spine. I'm just kidding. But they do overlap quite a bit. Reasons for leaving. Again, this correlates directly to the goals in the present, right? And as I said before, you need to think about what goals they had before they left. But this also correlates directly to things in which they're not necessarily leaving anywhere directly, but this might be a philosophical leaving, an ideological leaving. Maybe they're leaving a certain mindset. Maybe they're leaving a relationship, what have you. But this is important because most stories have this turning point. And for a lot of D&D players, this turning point happened out of, off the scenes, behind the scenes, I should say. I couldn't think of it. This happened behind the scenes. So you need to think about that as a writer. What caused them to do this? And as a novelist or a screenwriter, you might see this. And so this is incredibly important. A character who changes everything and decides to set out on whatever journey you're following them on, whether that be philosophical or physical, it needs to be a good reason. Because then if you don't have goals in mind, say, if your goal, for instance, as we talked about before, is money, power, and sex, and they go off into this D&D adventure, and they come across an undead beholder, a floating mass of flesh that's sloughing off, and with veins that are protruding and spurting bile and filth, and a singular giant eye that is milky and glossed over, along with 7 stalks with eyes at their tips that shoot disintegration rays and paralyzation rays at you. Again, say with me again. Say with me one time. Money, wealth, and power are not good goals in and of themselves. They are not nuanced, and most people would not continue on any journey in Dungeons and Dragons specifically, if that was their only goal. And again, and say this with me as well. A sad backstory is not necessarily a bad thing. Just because it's a cliche doesn't mean you can't make it nuanced and add a little bit of flair to it. Okay. No, now that we're out of the way, let's give an example here. Say you are fighting this undead beholder in Dungeons and Dragons, and your character gets hit with a paralyzation ray and then a disintegration ray, takes off his left arm, and he's sitting there paralyzed while slugs with the faces of people crawl up his body and cause his mind to light on fire, set ablaze with madness. After the fighting is done, their one goal that they had in mind. Their driving force was, I want gold. I want gold. And that's it. I just lost a limb. I've almost died for the 5th time. I've seen untold monstrosities. I've committed violence to many, many different people. Not all of them innocent. Not all of them guilty. But I want money. So I want to continue. And then you have cognitive dissonance set in. This is when the cognitive dissonance sets in. I want to keep playing this character. But realistically, and again, you don't need to make everything realistic in fantasy. That's not the argument here. But they stop being people. And that's when you start having to have these dialogues in your head of trying to keep them to stay. And then everyone else, the reader, the watcher, the fellow players, start looking at your character glossed over slightly. Not completely invested in the character anymore because your goals, your reasons for leaving, your reasons for staying don't make a whole lot of sense. And once you make that decision to stay in that situation, your character begins to make decisions that don't make a lot of sense for anything else, right? If you make this one decision, you have to continue to make that one decision. But then because of that one decision, you then have to make a bunch of other decisions because of that one, furthering the cognitive dissonance and furthering your character's assassination. You don't want that. So you need to make your reasons for leaving good. And you need to make them really grounded, because that will be the basis for the adventuring. And again, this can tie into your relationships. This can tie in to your goals. This should tie into your goals. Past, present, and future. Remember that. In terms of relationships, you can only look to the present and the past. However, your relationships can tie into your goals. Your goals can tie into your reasons for leaving. In fact, I think they should. I think that everything should tie into each other at this point. So think of it that way. Now, the 4th layer, and this is nuanced in and of itself. This is your knowledge of the world, the given knowledge of the world. How much does your player know? How much does the character know? How much do they know? Where are they from? What religions do they practice? What are the cultural practices of the area that they were from? What are the religions of the world? What are the organizations of the world? Who's the king? Who's the queen? Who is in power? How much magic is there? Do I know any magic? What languages do I speak? And it's so hard to make a pyramid, because I think that this is actually sometimes more important than anything. If someone asks a character in D&D, hey, where are you from? And they go, hey, DM, where am I from? Pulls everyone out of it. They instantly don't seem like a character. You see the player, not the character. And in roleplay, or if you're writing a character and you see that they just don't seem to belong anywhere, you don't know where they're from, they just sort of plopped into the world. Well, that's not cool. I don't know where they're from. I don't know what, everyone comes from somewhere, right? In real life, if someone asks you where you're from, which is commonly one of the first questions that people ask you, you most likely know where you're from, where you lived. And again, you can answer that in many different ways. Where are you from? Well, you could answer with the last place you lived, not necessarily the place you were born, but that's important as a character to know where you're from. And so another player asks you, hey, where are you from? And then you say, well, I'm from Tristfall. Instantly, you feel as a player more connected because you knew where you were from. So the character exists because they existed somewhere in the past. And then you're no longer a dot, like I said before, you're a line. And it started somewhere, and you want to be a line because everywhere on that line is something of importance. And if you're just a dot, then you have nothing behind you, you have nothing in front of you, and only now exists in importance. Well, that's not true because that completely contradicts everything that I said with the relationships. Your past relationships, it completely contradicts everything that I said with everything before. Your past influences so heavily what you do right now. So if you don't know where you lived before, if you don't know where you went after that, then where did everything else come from? Where did all of those relationships, where did all those goals exist? In your head, true, but certainly not in the character because they didn't exist anywhere, right? Very important and very slept on. Again, this knowledge can extend to religion. This can extend to history. This can extend to cultural practices. This can extend to leaders, different towns, professions that they may have had. How far back does their history go? Right? It's very important. And all of this can, again, lack of information can also be a tool if they know that they have a lack of information. If lack of information is a part of your world, that's cool too, because then if someone knows something, then that's a part of it. And that's the given knowledge of the world that makes that information interesting. But you can make every bit of information interesting. If they were, in my world, right, a character could have been born in Tristfall, moved to Dunbarrow, their parents were fishermen that would commonly fish in the Bay of Gold, and they would send their fish to Tristfall, and one day their fishing boat ran aground right south of the Scar of Cruel, and they went missing forever. I just named like 5 different locations. And if someone were to ask, what happened to your parents? I would know every single bit. I would know every single location that would make the world seem more existent. It would ground not only the world, but also the character. I would feel like I was a part of it and I was giving other players information. And just as if you're writing a novel, you can drop that information because you've created all of it, right? You know all the information that you can give to the reader to make it feel like this is a world that you can invest in. Because if the world is just simply your room, the world is pretty small. And you're not as interested in the world if there's nothing to explore, if there's nothing to find out, there's nothing to discover. As human beings, most of us are very information-driven people. And that doesn't mean that we're all academics or interested in academia, but we are interested in knowing more about the things that we're interested in. And if you're playing D&D, if you're reading a book, if you're watching a movie, then that means that you're interested, even in the slightest, into the world that's going on. And if you build upon that world and you give the characters knowledge, if you give the players knowledge, if you give the hero knowledge of the world, and if you give yourself knowledge of the world, then it makes the world more anchored. It gives the foundation that it needs to exist more solidly. It gives it more depth if there's things to discover, if you have that knowledge. Okay? The 5th and 6th layers coincide fairly heavily, so I'll just merge them together. Relationships to the main story arc, if any, is important. Specifically, I'm going to talk about D&D in this instance because if you're following a protagonist then in like a book or a movie, then they're obviously going to have a connection to the main arc of the story. And when it comes to roleplay, D&D and such, they're obviously going to have a connection to the main arc of the story eventually, but I'm talking about as you're creating it. As you're creating the story, you know what? Actually, scratch what I said before. Because if you're writing a character for a movie, a novel, or for RP, this is important. Do they come into it with that connection to the main arc, or do they fall into it? You can have various degrees of attachment to the main story arc. You can have them know, you can have them not know, you can have a tiny little toe in the water, or you can have them be the actual main arc of the story. And it can be discovered later, or they can know it. Your other players can know it, they can't know it. It doesn't matter. You get to decide, but you need to decide how much, if any, the characters or character is attached to the main arc. When, how, all of that. And again, goals, reasons for leaving, all of that, relationships, all of that coincides with one another yet again. Relationships to any of the party, secret or known. And this is specific to fantasy adventures, but can also exist within novels of the fictional, period piece, or futuristic kind as well. Dungeons and Dragons, people really like to add twists and turns, and I really, I love some twists. I really do, if they're done well. However, having relationships with the party can be tricky, because if you try and make it a secret, let only one person, like say that they're like the secret brother of another party member. I don't know. It's difficult to do, and I would actually just straight up not advise that happen in a story for D&D specifically. I think that can undermine a lot of character development in one person's mind. It can completely shift relationships, and it can give sort of a power imbalance to the person that knows about it. And if none of them know about it, then you don't really understand that Dungeons and Dragons is sort of the player's story and the Dungeon Master's story. And if you're a Dungeon Master who is making them brother and sister without their consent, or making them know each other without their consent or anything like that, I don't know. It just sort of undermines their storytelling and undermines their player creation. If a relationship is going to be had with the party, it is my recommendation that both people that have the relationship know about it. It can seem weird if all of a sudden you're like, oh, your entire relationship, your entire perception of the relationship has changed because of me or because of them. Good luck with that. Hope you like your character's direction just coming out of nowhere. And I understand that is very much different in a book or a movie. You can just do that as a writer, right? You can just have them not know it, and it can come out of nowhere, and that can be cool because it is all your characters. But specifically as it pertains to Dungeons and Dragons, would not recommend it, because it is a game for everybody, and that is I don't know. I just don't like it. I think that it causes a lot of issues, and they might not like it, and then you can't really undo it unless you retcon it, and then retconning can leave a dirty taste in people's mouths, and you just don't want to do it. So just try and stay away from it unless both people know, as it pertains to Dungeons and Dragons. However, as it pertains to all other character creation, think about it. What are the relationships to other people that you may know? Obviously, you should think about that. But as a writer, you need to think of that ahead of time. Do they have a relationship with this person? No? Okay, well then they're meeting them for the first time. Do they have a relationship to this person? Yes, it was their family friend from years ago that they only met when they were 8. That is something that person should know. Or that you as a writer should know, but maybe they don't. Do I know this person? Well, yes, it was their family friend that they don't recognize from when they were 6. Right? Those are all things that you need to recognize. However, again, I will reiterate for the last time, with Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games, it is very much different. You cannot treat this like it is your own book. I cannot stress this enough. This is a game for multiple people, not just one person. Okay. So that's all I really wanted to talk about, and I'll probably go into a bit more in depth with the other episodes that I'm going to do, where I'm going to touch more deeply on each of these, as well as some certain character tropes that I think can be avoided by thinking more about, what was said. But this was just an introduction, things that you need to think about when you are creating a character. For No Pixel, for D&D, for writing, for noveling, for writing a novel, fiction writing. Oh my gosh. Okay. But thank you for joining me. You can catch our D&D stream to see any examples of my writing, to make fun of me for being a hypocrite if you don't think that my writing is good. D&D streams, Anvil of the South, a more grimdark, deeper storytelling, Dungeons & Dragons persistent campaign that streams on Twitch at Mindflayer Inc. Pacific Standard Time, 6 p.m. And then we also have streams throughout the week, GTARP, I hope, and art streams that Dina Ingley does that supplement our streams. Also, we have a ton of clips and stuff on our YouTube, and I probably need to work more on this exit, like a slogan or something, like "See you, folks," or something cool like that. Anyway, thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you around stream, YouTube, what have you. Thank you so much. Have a good one.